Imagine standing at the edge of a city built more than 4,000 years ago. The streets are straight. The bricks are precisely measured. Water once flowed through hidden channels beneath your feet. Thousands of people once lived here, trading, working, raising children, and leaving behind symbols no one can fully read. Then slowly, the city grew quiet. There was no single king whose final words were recorded. No known conqueror claimed victory. No surviving chronicle explained what happened. Only the ruins remained. And somewhere among those silent streets lies one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. Did the Indus Valley Civilization truly disappear? Or did its people simply move beyond the reach of history? Long before the great cities rose from the plains, people were already learning how to live with the rivers of South Asia. Villages appeared gradually, supported by farming, herding, craft, and exchange. The landscape was never simply a desert or a single river valley. It was a vast world of floodplains, seasonal streams, grasslands, and distant mountains. Here, communities developed over generations, carrying knowledge from one settlement to another. They learned which soils could be cultivated, which animals could be raised, and how water shaped every season. From these scattered communities, something larger would slowly emerge. Not an empire announced by a conquering king, but a civilization built across an immense landscape. Quietly, patiently, and over centuries. The civilization that would become known as the Indus Valley Civilization did not belong to one narrow valley alone. Its settlement spread across a remarkable region, linking river plains, uplands, coastlines, and dry interior landscapes. Water shaped the rhythm of life, but not always in the same way. Some communities depended on seasonal flooding. Others relied on wells, reservoirs, rainfall, or carefully managed local sources. This diversity may have helped create a civilization connected by shared traditions rather than a single uniform landscape. Across great distances, similar styles of pottery, weights, bricks, ornaments, and symbols began to appear. The communities were not identical, but they were becoming part of a wider world, one whose connections would eventually stretch farther than many ancient people could have imagined. By the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE, the transformation had become impossible to ignore. Communities that had once been scattered across the landscape were now connected to an urban tradition of extraordinary scale. Cities such as Harappa and Mohenjo-daro became among the best-known centers of this world, while many other settlements formed a much wider network. Their builders used carefully standardized bricks. Streets were laid out with striking regularity. Water and waste were managed through systems that required planning, labor, and cooperation. Yet the cities do not present us with the familiar image of an ancient empire dominated by enormous royal monuments. Their power is harder to see. It seems to exist in the streets themselves, in the repeated measurements, the shared standards, and the remarkable coordination of everyday life. Among the most haunting places in the ancient world is Mohenjo-daro. Its name is modern, and the people who lived there did not call their city by that name. What remains is a vast archaeological landscape of streets, houses, wells, platforms, and public structures. The city reveals an urban culture deeply concerned with order and water. Brick-lined drains carried away wastewater. Wells provided access to fresh water. Homes were arranged around courtyards, creating spaces where private life could unfold behind the walls of the street. And then there was the Great Bath, a carefully constructed tank whose exact purpose remains uncertain, though its design suggests that water held a special importance. The city does not explain itself. It simply remains, brick by brick, waiting for us to ask better questions. The more we look at the Indus cities, the more unusual they become. Archaeologists have found no universally accepted portrait of a great emperor commanding the entire civilization. There are no monumental royal tombs comparable to those of Egypt, and no surviving historical chronicle naming a dynasty that ruled the cities. This does not mean the civilization had no leaders, officials, or political authority. It means the evidence does not yet reveal how power was organized. Perhaps different cities governed themselves. Perhaps regional authorities coordinated vast networks. Perhaps power was distributed through institutions we do not yet recognize. The truth remains uncertain, and that uncertainty is part of the mystery. In a world where so much was carefully standardized, the people who created that order left remarkably little behind to explain who stood at the center of it. Behind the impressive streets and drainage systems were ordinary people whose names have been lost. They woke before the heat became intense. They prepared food, worked with clay, stone, metal, shell, and precious materials, and cared for families within the walls of their homes. Much of what we know about them comes not from written stories, but from the objects they left behind. Grinding stones reveal the preparation of food. Tools reveal skilled labor. Ornaments reveal personal decoration and craftsmanship. The remains of houses show that daily life took place in courtyards, rooms, wells, and narrow streets. The civilization's greatness was not only in its cities. It was in the countless repeated actions of people who built, carried, shaped, traded, cooked, and lived within them. And among their most remarkable creations were objects made for distant worlds. The Indus world was not isolated. Its craftsmen produced goods that traveled far beyond the river plains. Carnelian beads, shell objects, metals, timber, and other materials moved through networks that connected distant communities. Archaeological evidence points to contact between the Indus region and Mesopotamia, where references to a place called Meluha have often been associated with the Indus world, though the exact nature of that connection remains debated. Trade required more than goods. It required trust, measurement, transport, and shared systems of exchange. The standardized weights found across many Indus sites suggest that commerce was governed by rules understood across great distances. Somewhere along these routes, languages met, merchants negotiated, and objects from one civilization entered the homes and temples of another. But the people who carried these goods left behind another mystery, a system of symbols that still resists translation. Among the most enduring mysteries of the Indus civilization is its writing system. Short inscriptions appear on seals, pottery, tablets, and other objects. The symbols are recognizable, but their meaning remains uncertain. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs, the Indus script has not been securely deciphered through a bilingual inscription that provides a clear comparison with a known language. The inscriptions are often brief, making the task even more difficult. We do not know with certainty what language the signs represent, or whether the symbols recorded full speech in the same way as other ancient writing systems. Every seal becomes a small, locked door. Behind it may have been a name, a title, a place, a commodity, or something else entirely. The civilization left us thousands of signs, but not the key to read them. The small seals of the Indus world may be among its most recognizable objects. Many are beautifully carved, often showing animals accompanied by signs. One repeated creature, commonly called the unicorn by modern observers, appears again and again. But the ancient people who carved it may have understood the image very differently. The purpose of the seals is also not fully certain. They may have been connected to trade, administration, identity, ownership, or ritual activity. Their small size makes them easy to overlook, yet their importance may have been considerable. A single carved object could carry an image, a set of symbols, and a connection to a wider social system. In a civilization that left few monumental portraits of rulers, these tiny objects may offer some of our closest glimpses into how people expressed identity and authority. At the heart of Mohenjo-daro stands a structure that has captured the imagination of generations, the Great Bath. Its carefully constructed basin, broad steps, surrounding rooms, and waterproofed brickwork reveal an extraordinary investment in water and architecture. But its exact purpose remains unknown. It may have been connected to communal practices, social gatherings, ritual activity, or functions that modern observers can no longer recognize. We should be careful not to place our own assumptions into its silent walls. What we can say is that the builders considered this space important enough to construct with exceptional care. Water was not merely a practical resource in the city. It was woven into the architecture of public life. And as the civilization reached its greatest urban achievements, forces beyond the walls of its cities were already beginning to reshape the world around them. Every great city depends on something more fundamental than monuments. It depends on water. Across the Indus world, communities developed different ways to obtain, store, and manage this essential resource. Wells were built within settlements. Drainage systems carried wastewater away from homes and streets. In some regions, reservoirs and other forms of water management became important. The exact systems varied from place to place, but the principle was clear. Life in a large urban community required careful coordination. Water could nourish fields, sustain households, support craft production, and also threaten settlements through floods. The people of the Indus civilization lived within this constant balance. Their cities were not separate from the environment. They were carefully constructed responses to it, and the more closely archaeologists study those responses, the more they see a civilization shaped by local landscapes rather than controlled by a single design. The cities of the Indus world were also centers of extraordinary craftsmanship. Artisans worked with materials gathered from many different environments. Stone was shaped into tools and ornaments. Shell from coastal regions was transformed into decorative objects. Copper and other metals were worked into tools and implements. Carnelian beads were drilled and polished with remarkable precision. These objects were not merely beautiful. They reveal specialized knowledge passed from one generation to another. A tiny bead could require careful selection of stone, controlled heating, grinding, drilling, and polishing. The finished object might then travel hundreds of miles. In this way, craft connected the workshop to the wider world. The civilization's achievements were not created by mysterious machines or lost technology. They were created by human skill, patience, and knowledge refined over countless hours. Animals were woven into the daily life and imagination of the Indus civilization. Cattle played important roles in farming and transport. Other animals lived alongside communities or appeared in art and carved imagery. Bulls, elephants, rhinoceroses, and other creatures appear on seals and figurines, though their meanings remain uncertain. An image may have represented identity, status, a story, a belief, or something we have no modern way to recognize. Even the animals themselves tell us something about the landscape. The Indus world contained rivers, wetlands, fields, forests, grasslands, and dry regions. Its people lived among environments that could change dramatically from one place to another. The civilization was therefore not built upon one landscape, but upon many, and those landscapes would eventually become part of the mystery surrounding its transformation. The spiritual world of the Indus people remains one of the most difficult to understand. Archaeologists have discovered figurines, animal imagery, unusual objects, and structures that may have held special importance. But objects do not explain themselves. A figurine is not automatically a deity. A seal is not automatically a religious symbol. A large building is not automatically a temple. The evidence allows possibilities, but rarely certainty. Perhaps some traditions involved water, animals, fertility, ancestors, or forces of nature. Perhaps different communities held different beliefs. What we can say is that the people of this civilization lived in a world filled with symbols. They carved, shaped, and preserved images whose meanings have largely disappeared. Beneath the silent stars above their cities, they too must have asked questions about life, death, nature, and the unseen. The end of the great urban phase did not arrive like a single dramatic night. The evidence suggests a long transformation, unfolding differently across different regions. Environmental conditions changed. River systems shifted. Some areas may have experienced increasing dryness, while others faced different pressures, including flooding or changes in water availability. Trade networks may also have weakened. The reasons remain debated, and no single explanation has been proven to explain every settlement. But the pattern is clear. The great cities gradually changed. Urban life became less dominant in many areas. Populations appear to have shifted towards smaller settlements and different ways of living. The story was not necessarily one of sudden disappearance. It may have been a long process of adaptation. The people were not simply erased. They were moving into a new chapter, one that would leave the old cities increasingly silent. When the great urban centers began to decline, they did not necessarily vanish in a single catastrophe. Archaeological evidence from the later phases of the Indus tradition suggests a gradual transformation. Some cities became smaller. Some areas were used differently. Construction patterns changed. Populations may have shifted toward villages and smaller communities. The immense systems that had once connected distant regions became less visible. But a city becoming quieter is not the same as a people disappearing. Families continued to live, work, farm, make tools, and raise children. The urban world was changing, but life continued beyond the great streets. This distinction matters. The end of a civilization is often described as though an entire population simply vanished. In the Indus case, the evidence points toward movement, adaptation, and transformation, rather than a single final moment. Rivers are never permanent in the way stone appears to be. They shift their courses, change their strength, flood their banks, and sometimes leave old channels behind. For the people of the Indus world, these changes could reshape the possibilities of life. Archaeological and environmental research continues to examine how changing river systems, rainfall patterns, and regional climate may have influenced different settlements. The answer was probably not the same everywhere. Some communities may have faced increasing aridity. Others may have experienced changes in flooding or river access. A settlement built around one water system could find itself living in a very different landscape generations later. The great cities had been designed to manage their environment. But no city, however carefully built, could completely control the rivers on which its future depended. The decline of the great cities marked the end of an urban system, but not necessarily the end of the people who had built it. Across the wider region, communities continued to live and develop. Some traditions changed. Others endured in altered forms. The highly standardized world of the mature Harappan period became less visible, while regional differences became more pronounced. This is why the word collapse can sometimes mislead us. A city may decline, a political or economic system may weaken, a cultural tradition may transform. But human beings rarely disappear from history as neatly as a chapter ending in a book. The people of the Indus world adapted to new conditions. Their descendants lived through later centuries of South Asian history, even as the great urban civilization itself became increasingly difficult to recognize. One of the deepest mysteries of the Indus civilization is also one of the simplest. We do not know the names of the people who built its greatest cities. We do not know the voices of its rulers, the stories told by its elders, or the private thoughts of its families. There is no surviving chronicle describing a king's reign or a soldier's campaign. Instead, history reaches us through fragments: a broken pot, a bead, a brick, a seal, a drain beneath a street. These objects seem small, but together they form a human record. The people of the Indus world did not leave behind a written story that we can easily read. They left behind the physical evidence of lives once lived. And sometimes, that silence makes the mystery even more powerful. For more than a century, scholars have studied the symbols of the Indus civilization. They have compared patterns, counted signs, examined their direction, and searched for connections with known languages. Yet no widely accepted decipherment has emerged. The problem is not a lack of effort, it is the nature of the evidence. The inscriptions are generally short, and the language behind them remains unknown. Without a bilingual text or another decisive breakthrough, the symbols continue to resist interpretation. Perhaps one day a new discovery will change everything. Perhaps the key lies in an artifact still buried beneath the earth. Until then, the script remains suspended between meaning and silence. 4,000 years ago, someone carved those signs for a reason. Today, we can see them clearly, but we still do not know what they said. For thousands of years, the great cities of the Indus world remained largely silent beneath layers of earth. Their ruins were still there, but the civilization that created them had faded from historical memory. Then archaeology began to reveal the scale of what had been lost. Excavations at sites such as Harappa and Mohenjo-daro uncovered streets, houses, wells, seals, pottery, tools, and monumental structures. What first appeared to be isolated ancient ruins became evidence of something far greater, a vast Bronze Age civilization connected across an enormous region. The discovery changed the story of the ancient world. Egypt and Mesopotamia were no longer the only great urban civilizations known from the Bronze Age. Beneath the soil of South Asia, another world had been waiting, one whose cities had survived even when their names had not. The Indus civilization challenges one of our oldest assumptions about ancient history, that great civilizations must be defined by great kings. The cities certainly required organization, standardized bricks, carefully planned streets, water systems, craft production, and long-distance trade could not have appeared without cooperation and authority of some kind. Yet the archaeological record does not clearly reveal a ruler who dominates the entire landscape. There are no universally accepted royal palaces or monumental tombs that explain the political system. Perhaps authority was shared among communities, elites, councils, merchants, or institutions we cannot yet identify. Perhaps the evidence has simply not survived. Whatever the answer, the cities remind us that a civilization can achieve extraordinary complexity without leaving behind a single face to represent it. The end of the great Harappan cities did not end human life in the regions they had shaped. Communities continued across the plains, river systems, and surrounding landscapes. Their ways of living changed over time, as all societies change. Some older practices may have endured, others disappeared, new traditions emerged. The relationship between the Indus civilization and later South Asian cultures is complex, and archaeologists continue to study which elements were preserved, transformed, or replaced. What is certain is that the land did not become empty. People continued to farm, trade, build, worship, raise families, and create new histories. The ancient cities were only one chapter in a much longer story. Their decline did not erase the landscape. It simply changed the way people lived within it. So, what happened to the Indus civilization? The honest answer is that there may not be one answer. The evidence points toward a combination of changes that affected different regions in different ways. Climate and rainfall patterns may have shifted. Rivers may have changed course. Agricultural systems may have faced new pressures. Long-distance trade networks may have weakened. Urban institutions may have become less sustainable. These possibilities are not mutually exclusive. A civilization does not always fall because of one dramatic blow. Sometimes a world becomes gradually more difficult to maintain. A city changes, then a network weakens, then people adapt. The mystery is not simply why the cities declined. It is how a civilization so large and connected transformed without leaving behind a clear account of the process. Mohenjo-daro does not tell us how its people felt when their city changed. It does not tell us whether they believed the future would resemble the past. We do not know the final conversations held in its courtyards, or the last families who left certain neighborhoods behind. But the city still speaks in another language. It speaks through the precision of its bricks, the depth of its wells, the care of its drains, the skill of its artisans, and the objects carried through its streets. Every surviving wall is evidence that someone once believed the future was worth building. And perhaps that is why the ruins remain so powerful. The city did not leave us a final speech. It left us the work of human hands and the silence that followed. Perhaps the greatest mystery of the Indus Valley Civilization is not that we know so little. It is that so much has survived, yet so much remains beyond our reach. We can see the streets where people walked. We can touch the objects they shaped. We can trace the systems that brought water into their homes and goods across distant lands. But their voices remain hidden. Their language is still uncertain. Their political world is still debated. Their final centuries do not offer us a single clear explanation. The silence can feel frustrating, yet it also reminds us how incomplete every human story is. Even a civilization that built cities across a vast landscape can eventually become a collection of fragments waiting for the future to understand. The ruins remember more than kings and battles. They remember systems. They remember the discipline required to measure bricks and weights. They remember the patience of craftsmen who drilled beads smaller than a fingernail. They remember communities that built wells, streets, drains, reservoirs, and homes. They remember a civilization whose identity may have been expressed not through colossal monuments, but through the repeated order of daily life. That order is visible across a remarkable distance. A seal found in one place can resemble one found far away. A familiar brick proportion can appear across different settlements. These similarities suggest connections that stretched across landscapes too large for any single city to control. The ruins may be silent, but their patterns still speak. To say that the Indus civilization disappeared may be too simple. The great urban system changed. Its largest cities declined. Its networks were transformed. But the people themselves did not simply vanish from the earth. Human communities continued across the same broad landscapes, adapting to new conditions and new ways of life. The story of the Indus world may therefore be less about disappearance than transformation. A civilization can end as a recognizable urban system, while its people continue into histories that no longer carry the same name. The cities became ruins, but the land remained inhabited. Rivers continued to flow. Fields continued to be cultivated. Children continued to grow up beneath the same enormous sky. The civilization had changed, but human life had not ended. Perhaps one day, the symbols of the Indus civilization will finally be understood. Perhaps a new discovery will reveal the language behind the signs, the names of its cities, or the structure of its society. Perhaps the answer will come from an artifact still hidden beneath the soil. Until then, the civilization remains suspended between what we know and what we can only imagine. We know that its people built cities of remarkable complexity. We know they traded across great distances. We know they mastered crafts, managed water, and created systems that connected communities across an enormous region. But we do not know what they called themselves. And so, one final question remains. What did the people of the Indus Valley believe their world would become? More than 4,000 years ago, people across the Indus world built cities that would one day become mysteries. They shaped bricks, carved seals, traded across distant horizons, drew water from wells, and organized daily life on a scale that still astonishes us. Their cities eventually changed. Their networks weakened. Their urban world faded into the long movement of history. But they did not leave nothing behind. They left streets that still reveal their order, objects that still reveal their skill, cities that still reveal their ambition, and symbols that still refuse to speak. Perhaps that is the final legacy of the Indus Valley Civilization. It does not give us a complete answer. It gives us a question. How much of human history has already disappeared, and how much is still waiting beneath the earth to be found?